Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learned from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself. So please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And all resources that you see shared as links in the chat will also be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to webinar registrants as well. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Lastly, before we begin, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on tomorrow on March 16th, we invite you to join us for a Housing as a Platform series session focused on supporting young learners at home and at school with Boston Housing Authority. Next week on March 22nd, we invite you to join us for Moving Towards Relationship-Centered Schools. Closing off the month of March, we have an emerging model session on children's savings accounts, building wealth, aspirations, and prosperity for children and families. And again, we invite you to join us for another month of GLR Learning Tuesdays, starting with this session on April 5th, focused on learning ovations as a comprehensive data-based approach to learning. Registration and more information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Emily Samos, Senior Consultant for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and hello and welcome to each and every one of you. And thank you so much for joining us today for the GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled One State's Big Bet on Community Schools, a Follow-on Conversation. And so today's exchange of ideas picks up on the conversation we had in early February with José Muñoz of the Coalition for Community Schools and other leaders that explored community schools as what the campaign calls a big bet worthy strategy. And this is a strategy that the Biden administration is prioritizing through a large infusion of new funding. That February session dove into the definition of community schools, the central role of relationships, and the importance of implementing this approach system-wide so that it's not relegated as a program that only serves a segment of the school population. And so today we are absolutely thrilled to engage in a discussion with California's Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, to continue this look into community schools and explore California's own $3 billion bet on the approach. GLR Executive Fellow John Gomperts will engage in conversation with Superintendent Thurmond about California's community schools partnership, its core elements, and what implementation will look like in a place as large and diverse as California. John will then moderate a panel discussion among experts from California and national organizations about the significance of California's investment, what other communities can learn from California's big bet, and the potential for deploying the community schools model to truly create learning environments that provide transformational opportunities for whole child education. We are excited to pick up where we left off in February today and really dive into the challenges and opportunities of implementing this model. We know that the process of reversing learning loss and targeting equitable recovery will be a marathon and not a sprint. And we expect to host many more discussions to continue to explore community schools and other big bet-worthy strategies that can make a real impact. So please keep your eye out and plan to join us again for these future sessions. And to begin our conversation, I'm honored to welcome and introduce our esteemed moderator, our featured speaker, and our panelists with us today. And just a reminder, my intros will be super brief, and you are encouraged to access the full bios that are linked in the chat. So our moderator today, many of you know by now, is John Gomperts. He is a GLR's Executive Fellow and a longtime leader in nonprofit and government organizations. Before joining us, John served as president and CEO of America's Promise Alliance and was the director of AmeriCorps in the Obama administration. And of course, featuring today, we are so excited to have State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, who is responsible for the largest public school system in the nation with more than 6.3 million students in over 10,000 schools. Since taking office in 2019, he has created and championed historic initiatives to close the achievement gap and to improve equity, access, and opportunity for California's public school students. And then we have our great discussants, our panelists. We have Araceli Chavez. She is the Director for Family and Community Engagement at the California Association for Bilingual Education. And prior to joining CABE, she served as the coordinator for family and community engagement at the Anaheim Union High School District, where she helped to secure seed money to pilot the first 2 community schools in areas of great need in Anaheim. We have Abe Fernández. He is the Vice President of Collective Impact at Children's Aid, where he directs the National Center for Community Schools and oversees place-based collective impact initiatives in New York City. He has over 20 years of experience in education, youth development, and the social impact sector, including roles with South Bronx Rising Together, Strive Together, and the Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative, among others. Finally, we've got Hayan Kimner, who has joined us before, and she is the director for the California Community Schools Learning Exchange and is currently managing the Brookings Institution's Community Schools Forward National Task Force. She is also a Senior Policy and Research Fellow for Policy Analysis for California Education, and previously led the development of district-wide community school strategies in San Francisco and Emory, and the Emory Unified School District in California. Lastly, we've got Jeannie Oakes. She is a Senior Fellow in Residence at Learning Policy Institute and Presidential Professor Emeritus in Educational Equity at UCLA. She focuses on projects related to community schools, deeper learning, teacher preparation, and resource equity. And she was previously the Director of Educational Opportunity and Scholarship Programs at the Ford Foundation and has published several books on education equity. I'm now excited to turn it over to John to get into our conversation with Superintendent Thurmond. So John, please take it away.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks as always for your good introduction and for putting this all together. Superintendent Thurmond, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to see you, John.
Nice to see you. I have to say to you, I'm a Californian, even though I'm standing in Washington, D.C. And in my family, the first big campaign I remember was Wilson Riles' campaign to become State Superintendent of Education in 1970. And while my family specialized in losing candidates, Superintendent Riles' victory in that election was a huge cause for celebration in our household. So I'm familiar with the office that you're sitting in, and I'm really delighted that you're there and you're joining us. So thanks very much.
Thank you for that investment in making a positive outcome for Superintendent Riles, who, for those who don't know, was the first African-American to ever serve as the California State Superintendent. And he prioritized early education, and we saw major investments as a result of his tenure. So thank you, and I'm glad to be talking to Californian by way of Washington.
Well, it's really nice to meet you. So let's fast forward to today. I have to say, what you're doing with communities and community schools in California is truly extraordinary, Tony. And I'm curious. I think it would be helpful for our audience to understand how first you arrived at your own belief in the community schools model, and then second, after we hear about you, then how did that turn into action at the state level? So how did this happen for you?
You know, my journey with community schools started when I was a school board member around 2008. And I called for our district to become what's known as a full service community schools district. And that was the West Contra Unified School District in the Bay Area in California. And our district became just that. But unfortunately, you know, I was a school board member during one of the Great Recessions in California. And so we were a community schools district in name with limited resources to back it up. We had a few schools that were supported by local cities that actually had a community schools coordinator, which we know is one of the key elements to community schools, but not in a broad way. And so my introduction came first as a school board member and someone who, I'm trained as a social worker.
Yeah.
And I believe in the things that we do to address, the physical, emotional, and social needs of our children, ultimately will support their achievement. And the data shows it. And so that's where my journey began officially. And then as a legislator here in California, I continue to advocate for it. And in my very first year as state superintendent in 2019, we called for community schools. And it took a few years to get there, but it's been funded the year before, and now it's funded in a major way in our state budget in a $3 billion strategy to help our kids. And so It's been quite the journey, but I'm glad to see it.
It's so exciting. It took a while to get there, you said. So tell us what you were thinking about, what data you were looking at, what information you were looking at, and then curious, who were the big advocates and were there significant detractors? I mean, were there politics involved in all this?
I don't know that there were any detractors, but whenever you're talking about making financial investments, there are some who believe that if you're doing anything other than traditional academic kind of focus interventions, they don't see that as a value. But the data supports that, right? That community schools can help to improve attendance, that community schools can improve students' GPAs and their performance on standardized tests. And we know through common sense that when a student is hurting physically or hungry, while they can still learn, those are barriers to their learning. And so we've used those arguments to help get legislation through the California legislature to support community schools. And we arrived today at what is now a $3 billion strategy, probably the largest that any state has seen. And the timing couldn't be better. We were pursuing community schools before the pandemic because we believe in their value. The pandemic has certainly shown us that given the social emotional needs of our children, that a community school strategy is critical, and we're glad to be implementing it at this time.
Let's go back for a second, if you will, to the data. There's the common sense, like kids can't learn if they're hurting, if they're hungry, if they're unhoused, all of those things. But what data did you look at? I think that people on this call are going to be really interested in this, and they're going to want to present some hard data that those barriers, which we all know to be barriers, actually interfere with kids' learning, and removing those barriers or lowering those hurdles actually leads to achievement.
For me, it actually goes back to, if you think about it, these aren't really new programs or new claims. And for me, it goes back to what we called Healthy Start, perhaps a generation ago, and the need to have more, wraparound programs and supports in our schools. California has a very robust system of school-based health clinics. And so, I'm happy to get data that we can drop into the chat. If that's helpful, I'll have my team get us a link that we can drop into the chat. But I would just say that the data correlates to things like improvements in absenteeism, higher GPAs, better test scores, and certainly better social skills and social development for young people. So we'll get a couple of links that we can drop in the chat. And, if it's possible, I'd like to share just one graphic now, and I'll ask my team to put that up, because we don't see community schools as sort of acting in sort of by itself. We see it as part of a series of strategies that can transform California schools. You can see that community schools is in the center. And as you look at the graphic, you can see that we place this is what we call the way to transform community schools. Obviously, we're providing a universal preschool now. We're moving towards providing universal preschool for every 4-year-old. More professional development for our educators, including anti-racism training, anti-bias training, universal meals for hungry kids, 2 meals for students, regardless of their background. We've got a $4.3 billion mental health strategy for young people from birth to 25. More expanded learning opportunities. We think that learning happens during school, before school, and after school. And so when you put these all together, we believe that it's going to take these types of programs to help transform schools and help our students overcome and heal from the trauma of the pandemic, recover academically, and thrive going forward. Now, they're not the only programs. There are many others, but we see this as a core nexus of programs. And so thank you for sharing the slide.
That's great.
I just wanted to say that we don't see it as working in isolation, but rather as a network of programs. And quite frankly, I always tell people, this is more than just saying we need health services or mental health services or social services. We think that these can be transformative programs that can end the school to prison pipeline. Our kids need to be educated, not incarcerated. And so obviously we have deep belief in this, and we're excited to be implementing this strategy in California.
Tony, California is such an enormous, diverse, geographically, economically, all those differences, which is part of what makes it so wonderful and fascinating. I wonder how you see this approach rolling out from places, as diverse as Redding and Los Angeles and San Bernardino and Humboldt and San Francisco Bay Area. And the Valley too, Bakersfield or Lodi.
You're absolutely right. We think that community schools can be a strategy in almost any community: urban, suburban, rural, frontier communities. We have communities that struggle with access for getting healthcare providers, getting access to broadband, and so we think that community schools can be an important ingredient in any of these communities. Of course, it may look a little different in how it gets implemented. And so we've just rolled out a request for application for school districts to apply for community schools planning grants. And then there are places where the community schools are already taking place. So there will be implementation grants. But we've also established some pillars that we think are important to be a part of community schools. I know your panel is going to go through those. In many ways, the pillars that we've established really do mirror the national movement that is community schools. And I know your panelists will talk about that. We've also built in a technical assistance strategy because we want to provide coaching and guidance. So I think there will be some uniformity in terms of understanding what is community schools, right? It's hard to talk about community schools without having a community schools coordinator. And it's also hard to talk about community schools without having robust community engagement in defining the delivery of those strategies. And we've had countless meetings leading up to the release of this RFA from community partners, parents and students, equity groups, school leaders, to really help shape that strategy. And so we think these are the components that are important for community schools. But absolutely, we expect if there's community input, then it ought to reflect that community. And so certainly there should be some diversity from community to community, but we think also some uniformity by following these pillars of community schools.
So Tony, we hear, now we say, you heard Emily say, you said it, $3 billion. That's a ton of money. It's crazy. Where's this money coming from? Are you putting together existing resources, or are these entirely new resources?
It is hard to imagine that in what I call the toughest moment that we'll ever experience in the pandemic, where we've lost lives, where there's been such disruption of schools, of community, of the workplace, that somehow in California in the last 2 years, we have experienced a record surplus in terms of revenue coming to our state. Now, we know there's a fiscal cliff probably right around the corner. And so we've worked closely with our governor and our legislature to provide the dollars for these $3 billion. And so it's $3 billion for community schools. It's $4 billion for this mental health strategy. Billions really to cover the cost of providing preschool for every 4-year-old and universal meals. And so even in this most difficult time, California has experienced an incredible surplus. And I'm grateful to our partners and our governor and our legislature for directing that to the kind of resources that we know we're going to need to help our students recover from the trauma of this pandemic and to thrive going forward. And so that's how these funds have come about. In many ways, one-time allocations that we think can carry lasting impacts. And of course, we're already thinking about how are we going to sustain this? And I'm happy to talk about that at any point in time, but we've been giving that quite a bit of thought.
Tell us some of your early thoughts on sustaining.
We're coupling this community school strategy also with a demonstration project where we help our school districts, where we teach them on how to draw down more federal dollars, Medicaid dollars. Medicaid is a federal entitlement, right? That means that any student who qualifies should be able to receive those supports regardless of the cost. And, California, while we have the largest footprint in Medicaid, we have one of the smallest footprints for using Medicaid for mental health services. And so we're going to work with 25 of our school districts to provide them technical assistance and training on how to draw down Medi-Cal. And really what we're trying to do is learn how to braid funding. And we believe that we can use federal dollars like Medicaid to extend community schools. Our foundation community has been incredible. We are grateful to many, in the Stewart Community Foundation, the California Endowment, and others. They believe deeply in community schools and have been working on them for years. And so while we're still working on the model, we believe that there's a way to braid funding to sustain community schools beyond what this initial state investment will provide.
So Tony, we all know that sadly, but realistically, we're not the most patient set of people, right? We put a lot of taxpayer dollars into things and we want to see results. And we know at the same time that community schools is something of a long game strategy. So I'm curious how you balance those two things. And people who are listening who might want to advocate for this in their communities, it's not a quick fix. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing that you can look at to see, we're making the right kind of progress. We're on the road to success. So tell us what you're looking for as sort of early indicators of success that are more than process indicators.
We're literally getting the money out on the street. Initially, the thought was that there would only be planning grants in the first year for community schools. But there's a recognition that there are many communities that are already engaged in implementing community schools. Our largest county, Los Angeles County, through the Los Angeles County Office of Education, led by another social worker, Dr. Deb Duardo, a great leader, has been implementing community schools for the last 3 years through a strong partnership with their county board of supervisors and the funding that has come there. And so we believe that we are now allowing school districts to apply for first year implementation dollars that we think can make incredible differences in the community. And obviously we hope that they'll hire quickly a community schools coordinator. That's sort of a key ingredient that we see to connecting students and families to the right resources. You're right, this is not going to happen overnight. But we've not lived through a pandemic before. And we can't expect, after all that we've experienced, that things are going to change overnight. But we know that if we focus on keeping people safe and being able to continue to learn, we can build back. Our students can recover. Our students are resilient. And we've got to focus on how we get them on a path and on a trajectory to improve. Much of the data on student performance has shown how our students have suffered. And if you think about it, I understand that we're impatient as a taxpayer society, but we should think about some of the ills that we've been dealing with. They didn't happen overnight either. For example, when you go into the pandemic and you're moving into remote learning in a state like California, that means there's 1 million students who are without a computer, without access to high-speed internet. Those numbers probably mirror the experience in many other states. Yeah, sure. And closing the digital divide became our top priority at the start of the pandemic. But this has been around for decades, and it's unacceptable that there could be, in a nation with the wealth that we have, this digital divide. And so it will take some time, but we think that community schools is going to, I saw a study not long ago that said for every dollar you invest in community schools, you see a return on investment of at least $13 or $14 or $15 in terms of social impact and positive impact. And so we'd say to folks, stay the course. It's a proven program, and we'll do what we can in the interim. But this is going to provide dividends, dividends to supporting students and our families.
Tony, I want to ask about one population that is sadly so large in California, which is unhoused. people are experiencing homelessness, and we know that there are more than 1 million kids across the country each year who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. And I'm curious how you see the intersection of the community schools approach and trying to respond to the challenges that kids experiencing homelessness face.
It's heartbreaking to acknowledge that there's probably 240,000 homeless students in the state of California. We think that number might actually be low because the counts sometimes don't reflect the experience. And then of that 240,000, there are probably about 8,000 homeless students who are completely on their own. Hard to imagine. And so we are engaged in conversation right now with legislators and others about how to provide supports at our schools that can support those students. And the way to do that is through, having liaisons at the school site who can identify homeless youth, support them, and get them connected to various programs that will be able to support them. Also connecting families to early intervention programs and supports. We are concerned that if we don't support homeless students, they will become homeless adults. We know that they're at greater risk to do that.
Sure.
The community school strategy really is a way to provide these kind of site liaisons who can work with students and their families. The community schools coordinator can make the connection to families to important programs. We're honored to work with organizations like the John Burton Foundation on how to look for ways to support these families. We may find ways to provide additional funding. In our state, we call out funding for foster youth and for historically disadvantaged students, but we don't currently call out funding for homeless youth. And through the great partnership with organizations like the John Burton Foundation, we are talking about how we might do that and make sure that our students can get connected to the right resources. And by the way, in doing so, we might actually leverage more federal dollars to help these same families by getting a more accurate count, being able to leverage more federal dollars to support these same families. And so we're at the beginning of this strategy, but we think community schools can play a key role in how we support these families.
Similar question, Tony, with respect to children with special needs, who've often been seen as sort of a separate population. And here, when we have a community schools kind of approach, this is for everybody. It's part of the whole thing is inclusion and belonging and participation. So how do you see the community schools approach intersecting with or accelerating work with students with special needs?
California has a system of regional centers that work with youth and adults who have developmental disabilities. I'm a former social worker. Having worked in this system, it's important to me that our community schools and our coordinators know how to connect families to these regional centers. One of the things that regional centers do is early intervention and assessment for where students are developmentally and to identify their needs. And so I believe that community schools is a key connector to what our regional centers do. And we've got to work with families, in our special education programs. Our families have suffered during the pandemic because with everything remote early on, families couldn't get access to assessments, couldn't get access to specialists. And now that our schools are open again, our community school strategies will want to work closely with our families of students with disabilities. Our state has made massive investments in expanding what we do in special education, but here's our challenge. We've got to be able to recruit more special education teachers. We've got to recruit more one-on-one aides who work with students. And California, like most states, is experiencing a workforce shortage of teachers, of classified staff, of bus drivers, of counselors. And so we are working simultaneously on a strategy to support recruitment of more teachers and classified staff. And literally, we are working on a strategy right now to help us recruit 10,000 new mental health clinicians because we know that families have been without mental health services before the pandemic. That's been exacerbated. We see an increase in depression and suicide. And so we don't want community schools coordinators making referrals for mental health and the workforce not being there. And so we've introduced a bill that we're sponsoring this year that would provide scholarships to aspiring clinicians. We're literally working on building out a pathway for those who want to become mental health clinicians at the same time that we're rolling out the community schools strategy.
Yeah, it's so smart and it's so thrilling. I'm anticipating that people who are listening to this conversation are getting excited, and want to take action. I'm curious, as sort of a last question for you, Tony, and thanks so much for your time, is what advice would you give? You've followed this, you've gone down this path for almost a decade yourself. Say you're somebody who's listening to this and you're super intrigued and you really want to level up what is happening in your community, and you think this community schools approach may be the thing. What advice would you give to them?
Well, I do hope that other states will make the investment in community schools and then be dutiful to the pillars of community schools, and to follow what the national movement has taught us about how community schools work. I know you've got somebody on from the Learning Policy Institute. We're honored. They're a great partner for us. Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, who also serves as our state board president, has been a great partner in our work on how we move out community schools. And I know you've got Hayen and others, who are on today. We have to follow what the literature has shown us. I think we have to be dutiful to how we do the implementation. To the point you made earlier about people being impatient, we have to stay the course with these programs. And the need is greater than ever, but the moment is now. And that we have the resources to do this, utilizing even the federal resources that have come down. Now is the time for us to advance programs. There are those who will want to be tempted to say, is this mission creep? Are we going beyond just what we should be teaching our kids? And I would invite people to see this as a collaborative partnership. There's nothing that will ever replace great teaching and learning and training that we provide to our educators. But when you pair resources like community schools with what we do to support teaching and learning, we know that we are creating whole children, and we're addressing their social emotional learning needs at the same time that we're addressing their academic learning needs. And so and then just get input from your communities. If the services that we provide reflect the needs that we are hearing from school leaders and community leaders and parents, and we can do great things to support all of our students, our children of color, our low-income kids, students who are performing in all categories. This is a strategy that we all can benefit from and we all can win from. And we're welcoming partnership from anyone who wants to work with us in California, as we think it's going to be a great story to be told once we get through the hard work of implementation.
Well, thanks so much. I just have to say, again, coming back to being in California, this is thrilling to hear. And your leadership is full of power and passion and brilliance. And I love all of it. And I'm so glad we were able to bring this conversation to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading Network. It was really great. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you. And so many great connections to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. We too are now implementing our own reading by third grade initiative, and we've given ourselves a deadline to get that done. I want to thank Ralph Smith and everyone from the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. We think it's so important of a skill to build, and we're excited for the rest of today's conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Take care. All right, thanks. Now I want to invite in the rest of our panelists, Araceli and Hayen, Abe, and Jeannie. I think you could all join on camera right now, if possible. I see you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Wow. Okay, we're full of energy now. That was fantastic. And let's go. Araceli, I'd love to start with you because you've worked on this at the community level. So you hear the superintendent, all the, exciting, the giant numbers and everything. You've been doing this for a while. And I'm curious, I assume that you're excited about the state level investment and leadership, but I'm curious what you would say to communities about what's most important for making the community schools approach a success.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, John. I'm happy to be here representing CABE on behalf of our board. I just want to say that these are great times. We've been pushing for community schools for a while, and to have this announcement about this $3 billion grant, that was just, music to our ears in Anaheim. And I would say that there's lots that still needs to happen, to get this on its way. But it's a very good start. And I would say that schools that are looking into community schools really need to look at their current systems and what they already have in place, because it's not going to happen, from one night, to the next. You're not going to wake up and say, I'm a community school, right? School districts really need to look at what they're currently doing. What systems do they already have in place? What staff do they already have that's supporting this kind of work? How are they doing on family and community engagement? Do we already have staff that's supporting that kind of work? And how can we expand, into community schools? We need to really look at, are we really training our staff to really understand what community schools mean? And are they seeing this as an approach and not a program? This really is a shift in mindset. It really is going to take, school districts to look at their current culture and what are we doing and how can we shift into this different mindset so that we're not feeling like we're adding on and teachers are feeling like, oh no, what are you going to ask us to do next? That's not what we're doing.
So what's most, that strikes me as entirely correct, this notion of a mindset and orientation. And we know those are not that easy to change, right? Particularly when you're talking about big bureaucratic systems with lots of invested interest. So what is most helpful to get people to move in the direction at a local level, move in the direction of a different mindset about what's going on here and how to change the system?
Absolutely. I think, first we need to start by assuring that, we're being culturally and linguistically responsive and understanding the needs of our community, and that we are customizing services to address the needs of that community. So we need to go out and talk to people, survey our community. What is it that you're looking for in a community school? We can't build a community school without the input from our parents, our families, our community partners. We can't bring services that perhaps aren't the services that our community needs. There needs to be a lot of education and information put out there, and maybe starting with our county offices of education, putting information so that teachers from pre-K to college are really understanding this concept of community schools. I think there also needs to be an institutional change in the way that teachers and administrators are being prepared. They're going into these teacher prep programs and perhaps they're not learning about how to engage with students to really identify some of the issues that are happening in the homes and those challenges that they're facing. How do we do follow-up work with our students? How do we connect with families? So there needs to be, it has to be a transformative change all across the board, starting from the teacher preparation programs down to, working with our communities, with our local elected officials. We need to bring them in to see, what this work is like.
Let's so use your Anaheim experience as sort of a model. I'm sure lots of things went right, and I'm betting a few things went sideways also when you were trying to do this. So what can we learn from your experience in trying to shift the mindset and ultimately the approach and resources of a pretty big community just south of Los Angeles?
I think really getting the buy-in from everybody at the district it was very important with Anaheim. And I think some of the lessons learned was that, we really needed to bring teachers on from the get-go. And now, Anaheim is working with the teacher union. The teachers are really hearing it from fellow teachers. They're hearing about this wonderful work with community schools and they're getting excited about it. They're not nervous, they're not anxious. They're really looking at, okay, bring this on, let's get this going. Really bringing your school boards, on board and really presenting to them, presenting the data and having them understand the importance of backing something like this up. And then of course, getting leadership to understand that this is again, a shift in mindset. And supporting folks who are trying to secure grants and are trying to, I remember asking, we need grant writers, there's money out there. we need somebody to help us with this. So there's a lot of different components that, that need to be at the right place at the right time. And so I think just having the right information and having the right people in the room is going to make a difference with getting support.
It's great. Thanks so much, Araceli. Abe, I want to tap you now. You've been at this a long time and have seen implementation, adoption in the first instance, and then implementation across a range of communities. And I'm curious for your observations about what are the essential elements for adoption and then secondarily for successful implementation. Talk about adoption first, where Araceli left off.
Yeah, and first, just really pleased to be here and very excited for California and for the example I'm hoping that California is setting for the rest of the country about how to invest in this work. What's really important to note here is that even though there is a lot of recent interest in community schools, this is not a brand new idea, right? So we have been doing this for a very long time in pockets all over the country. And there are many, many folks who have learned quite a few lessons. And so I think I'm really, really excited to hear the superintendent mention the investment, not just in implementation, but also in capacity building, which we think is a really important part of this. We don't think it's just a nice thing to do. We think it's necessary. And there are a few lessons that I think would be really smart for folks to listen to. I think one of them is making sure that there is adequate support for folks who are doing this work, not just those brand new coordinators, but school leaders and teachers and community partners. We all kind of need to learn from each other about how to approach this. Another really important lesson is that you don't go from being a conventional school to a community school overnight, right? There are these, I think what we've learned from our own experience, and I should say that, I'm coming to you from New York City, where Children's Aid has been doing this work for 30 years, and we're still learning how to do this. And so our work here in New York City, plus all of our clients around the country, we've seen patterns emerge, right? We've seen that there are these stages of development for how community schools really emerge over time and effort. And it's important to first look at that as a way to kind of normalize the fact that it does take time to do this, but also to help people visualize what the next stage looks like and to come up with strategies to get to that next stage. So I think the developmental process is really important. And even though a lot of folks are going to want things to move really quickly, it's so important to give everyone time to really understand what this work requires and to start doing that work without sort of wondering why in 6 months we haven't figured it all out yet.
When I hear you on the capacity building, I think that's all really interesting. Like you say, you've seen some patterns. What are the important things that you're seeing in the early stages, like in that moment when you move from adoption, like, oh, we got this great idea, we're gonna do this, and we know that every great idea is only as good as the implementation of that idea. So when you move into that early stage of implementation, where let's say you have the buy-in of key leaders, but now you're going to actually start to do the work. What do you see as those important first steps?
Yeah, and by the way, we call that moving from the exploring stage to the emerging stage, right?
Okay.
Where you sort of now realize you want to do this. We know it's going to take some work. What does emerging into this work look like? And I think a really important first step is what is a process that many folks call a needs assessment or a needs and assets assessment or an opportunity assessment, really just a way to get a really clear understanding of what do we know about our young people and our families and our community? What are the resources we have that we can currently leverage? Where are there opportunities to create some new partnerships with folks? Let's just get a sort of a lay of the land, and thinking very broadly, come up with a picture of what's going on. Now, that does a couple of things. First, it gives you some really good information that is up to date. And honestly, even schools that did this a couple of years ago, we all got to do it again because the world has changed so much. And this really should be an ongoing process. But the second thing it does, which is really critical, is that it engages many, many different voices in the process. The idea here is to engage, as we heard from Araceli, we got to bring the community into this process. And so that means obviously the young people in that school, if you can, families, teachers, school staff, partners who are currently engaged, but also folks in the community, other partners you haven't engaged quite yet, businesses, all of who have a stake in schools being successful. Even adults who do not have children or don't have children in the system can find their way to contribute to this process. And so what you find after doing this is that not only do you learn more about what's going on from many, many perspectives, you also have now started to bring more voices into how the school is making decisions. And then you're really on your way to becoming a community school.
That's really great. Yeah, thanks. It occurs to me as you're talking, and this business about, needs or opportunity assessment, getting a clear view of what's happening with kids. I think that sometimes it's a scary proposition, right? Because we don't love the results, and sometimes we like to obscure those results. So that's one, is that it really requires taking a hard look at what's going on. The other is that what you're describing is involves a disruption of power, the structures that have existed for a long time under the banner of community schools, and invites a whole different group of people to have voice in this. And I'm curious what your observations and experiences with that are.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it can be somewhat terrifying for folks to realize, how much we have to do, how much we haven't done. I think in many ways, the pandemic has shown us how much we just didn't fully understand. I mean, a lot of us did, but some folks didn't fully understand what was going on in communities. So this is a little bit of a reckoning, right? That these are challenges that we had well before the pandemic that maybe were revealed to us in new ways. But the process of understanding and inviting those voices to the table to help tell those stories, help to analyze what the data are telling us, it's so critical. We do a lot of thinking in the community schools world around adaptive leadership. And one of the lessons from the adaptive leadership world is that people don't resist change, they really resist loss, right? So if we can understand that when we're sort of bringing up these conversations that kind of challenge the power structures, there's going to be some pushback, because some folks are going to lose the ability to make decisions in the way that sort of benefit them. And I think that is part of the process here. So is this, this is the right work to do. And I often tell people, if it feels uncomfortable, you're doing it right, and good things will come.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important message. Thanks so much, Abe. I'm going to come back to you, but let's bring in Hayin and Jeannie. You two are longtime leaders and experts in this space. And I want to ask you both a sort of an open-ended question of, like, this is stuff you've been thinking about for a long time, and it's all kind of happening now. And what do you think about that? And what are your observations about that? Hayin, let's start with you.
I vacillate from being super excited and terrified in this moment. This is a big bet. We've got a lot on the table, and not just in terms of financial resources that are obviously trying to make up for and enhance decades and decades of divestments from public school funding. But this is also the work of decades and decades of practitioners who have been doing this work organically without a lot of money. So in order to do this work well, the things that Araceli and folks in the chat from Anaheim have been talking about, I know there's folks here from Los Angeles, UCLA, Oakland. I mean, this is where all of those practitioner experts, and by practitioner experts, I'm also including community organizers, parents, families, students. There's so much expertise to get right. And I think this is a lot of the work that we're working on as part of the Community Schools Forward National Task Force. The Learning Policy Institute is doing a lot of sort of collecting and synthesizing and really moving forward towards consensus around what clarity for community schools looks like. Because especially in California, where a label like community schools can actually mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah.
We've got this transformative vision. How do we actually make good on it?
Jeannie, your thoughts? Oh, you're on mute. It wouldn't be 2022 if somebody weren't on mute.
Of course. Well, I am also super excited and cautious for many of the reasons that Hayan just mentioned. One of the most gratifying things for a researcher, I've been studying education equity in schools and how school design and school policies can either promote or inhibit equity. And the research is getting increasingly clear, and most recently research from the sciences of learning and development about what schools need to look like. And what's happened in the last, dozen, maybe 6 to a dozen years is that researchers, the community schools community, the coalition, the National Center they practice what they preach, and they're very collaborative, and they've collaborated beautifully with researchers in order to get what we know from the knowledge base, the scholarly knowledge base, out into the public arena to say, this is not only just a feel-good thing that some communities like to do, there's a real platform of solid evidence about the efficacy of doing this thing, schools this way, for kids and for families. And so that I think this combination of having a research base and having such a strong, vibrant community of practitioners has really helped lift this up to the attention of policymakers who are now ready to move ahead. And of course, the challenge is now is to help people understand the nuances of what this is, so that places that just put a sign on their door saying we're a community school do not get evaluated as part of a genuine implementation of a community school.
Yeah, Jeannie, I totally hear what you're saying there, and really agree with you. I think it's interesting that I think Superintendent Thurmond mentioned something like this. It's where research and common sense really feel like they come together. I think part of the reaction that we all saw to Common Core, at least from a parent side, is, woof, this is a little narrow in its understanding of what we as parents are hoping for our kids. And this is such a much more holistic approach. And it also, as we were talking about with Abe, has a different feeling with respect to power and who's leading. All of that's fascinating. So here's a conundrum that I'd like to explore with all of you. We've all seen this hair on fire moment around the pandemic and the uneven impact of the disruptions of the pandemic on young people at really every grade level, but especially young kids, and that are the focus of the campaign for grade level reading. And we're all stirred up about, we need high dosage tutoring, and we need this, and we need that, and we need to fix this. And if we don't fix this in a big hurry, kids are going to be hurting for years and years and years. And here we have this much more systemic response called community schools, which everyone counsels is brilliant, but is not a quick fix. So, and I think it's thrilling. I mean, I hear $3 billion in California, but I also, this question of patience and the urgency, or the sense of urgency about getting quick results in learning recovery. I wonder how each of you think about that. Jeannie, let's go in reverse order. I know these are things that you've thought about a lot, and I'm curious for your reaction and what we ought to be looking for realistically from efforts to implement a community schools approach.
Well, I think first of all, the principle is that you've got to look for the things that community schools are designed to deliver. And that traditional forms of evaluation are looking at outcomes that just look at administrative data about sort of the end results of performance on reading tests or graduation rates. Those are extremely important, but they are way down the line. What community schools promises to deliver is not only student performance in the traditional ways we think about it, but student performance in terms of our kids developing the 21st century mindsets and skills that will allow them to be competent adults and vibrant problem solvers in communities. But we're not only looking at student performance outcomes, we're also looking at well-being. Much of what community schools is about is designing environments in which students' well-being is greatly improved. And yet we rarely look at that as something worth measuring. And a lot of times it's because there's not readily available data and numbers to be crunched, but that we have to think about well-being. And as we're doing that though, we also know that some of the outcomes we have to be paying attention to are changes in the conditions that kids are experiencing in the learning environments. And here's where the science of learning and development is so important, because it gives us principles like schools have to be relationship driven. They have to be based on mutual trust. They have to be responsive to and respectful of families and communities. They need to deal with physical, emotional, academic, and social and emotional development issues simultaneously. So we also have to pay attention to implementation and think about changes in the schools themselves as outcomes that we need, even though we know those are intermediate outcomes to what we're hoping to see down the line for young people as they proceed through a community school. So it's a matter of doing sort of two levels of looking, both looking at what kids are experiencing and whether those match what we know from the science of learning and development, and then looking what students are actually achieving in terms of their performance and their well-being. And we need to also look at things that we know are we know that the bottom line, did kids learn more? Did they graduate more? Did they go on to post-secondary? Those are lagging indicators. That's the long-term effects that we need to always keep our eye on. But we also need to look up close at the things that lead to that, the leading indicators, the short-term things, like are kids showing up? Are they engaged when they're showing up? Are they feeling like they have adults in schools that care about them? All of those things that we know are very strong predictors of more traditional outcomes as well. So there's lots to look for, but if we just relegate it to test scores, we are going to be in big trouble.
Abe, thank you, Jeannie. Abe, when you're counseling with districts or communities that are implementing community schools approach, what do you suggest to them they look at of these intermediate indicators to show some progress? Because of course the superintendent's right that we have to stay the course. Yeah, but just people telling you to stay the course is not that it doesn't do it all, right? We need some feedback loops that says, oh yeah, this is working. We don't go on a diet and just not lose any weight and think it's going great, or we don't take up an exercise regime and not see any feedback. So what are the feedback loops that you all are looking for that tell you, yeah, this is going well, and I can report back to the community that we're beginning to see some impacts? What do you look for?
Yeah, I guess I'll first just say that I really appreciate the commitment here to looking at the long-term nature of this work. But it doesn't mean that there aren't some short-term wins, right? And there certainly are, right? And so a lot of times we we coach folks to think about what is the combination of quick wins as well as the long-term strategy that you can sort of hold at the same time. The fact is you need both. If you only think long-term and you don't have those quick wins, people sort of lose interest and momentum. If you only do quick wins, you don't feel like anything real is changing. So you want to do both things. There are a couple of things that we see that happen pretty quickly. I think Jeannie probably touched on both of them. One is, which I know this is a key strategy of the campaign for grade level reading, is around chronic absence. And we advise that folks work there, not only because it's such an important leading indicator, but also because it ends up being almost this daily needs assessment for your school, right? The more that you are understanding why kids aren't showing up, it's just giving you this stream of information about what's going on, both where the challenges are and also where the opportunities are. Who knows who? What programs seem to be sort of bringing more kids in? Where are the relationships? So, and we've seen that number change almost instantly. It's amazing how much work can quickly lead to a good shift in that. And if anyone isn't familiar with Attendance Works, I just want to highly recommend that folks go out there and take a look at it.
Good man, good man, good man. Thank you.
Really, it's something that is, I mean, this is a terrible thing to say, but way back when I used to say that chronic absence is sort of the gateway drug to community schools, because you begin to realize that you need multiple partners engaged in the work of getting kids to come to school more often. And it just kind of sets the stage for more kinds of good work to happen. The other big change that we see happening pretty quickly is around just the school climate, and that parents feel more welcome and engaged. Young people begin to find ways to, look at the school, not just as a place I go to for instruction and curriculum, but a place to be creative and create things and be in sort of in community with other folks. So looking at the school building as a place to bring people together and create the climate for that, it's something that can also happen pretty quickly.
Araceli, does that match your experience in Anaheim about what you saw in terms of sort of the shorter cycle wins that begin to build momentum and get people to recommit, to feel like, yeah, this is right, this is going in the right direction?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Abe and Jeannie, I mean, you guys said it perfectly. There's so many outcomes that, can happen with the community school, but you look at, the little things, and it doesn't take rocket science. When kids are coming to the community resource center and taking the food that's being donated, to the school, when they're coming and getting basic essentials, and we know that there is a great need and they're taking advantage of this. When parents are coming, for food drives and they're getting vaccinated at our schools because they don't feel safe going to a clinic into the community, and we're offering COVID vaccines and COVID testing right on site, and we have hundreds of people lined up. Those are the short, wins, that Abe is talking about, the things that you say, okay, yes, instruction should be at the core of a community school, but, academics will come as a result of this. First we need to take care of these needs to be able to transition into seeing academic success. And we're not going to see that, for a while, but we know that it's working there. We just need to stay the course and look at those small wins as big things. Are kids happy? Are they feeling safe coming to school? And I think those are the things that, we have been able to see in Anaheim. Family engagement has increased, at both of these sites. Parents are heavily engaged and they feel welcomed and they're happy. So yeah, those are the things that you need to look at, to say that there's hope and this is going to work. And, the final goal is student achievement, but we'll get there.
Awesome. Hey, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this question. And also, I think, given your experience, some of the process indicators of early momentum in implementation. And while you answer, Emily, I think we should be ready to move to some questions after Hayen's comment, although I want to check whether anybody else who's on the call wants to add anything at the end of Hayen's comment. So go ahead, Hayen. Early indicators of progress and implementation success.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that oftentimes what we're looking at in terms of indicators is often at the student outcomes level or the school outcomes level, but it's also important to pay attention to what's happening with the inputs, right? If we're not actually making a difference to manage up and think about those policy and funding decision rules and decisions and how those decisions are made upstream, we are actually not moving towards sustainability. So a lot of folks have put in the Q&A and in the chat just questions around capacity building, questions around training, questions around guidance, principals, teachers, community organizations. All of that stuff is upstream and needs to be part of that process. Second, it's weird to quote Abe when
he's great. He's right there. Here he is.
No, but I usually quote him when he's not there, so it's a lot easier. But when he talks about community schools and sort of how long does it take, right? And when community schools implementation is successful, how long it takes is how long is it that trust is established. Community schools implementation happens at the rate of trust, at the speed of trust. And so those are process indicators that, you know, folks in education have really turned to. When you've got the Chicago Consortium and Tony Breik, can't get more quantitative than an HLM guy, hierarchical linear modeling. And when he is looking at relational trust as being a huge indicator of school transformation and transformative success, that's really important. So from a process standpoint, it's not just about the checklist. It's not just about how many families are you talking to and students. It really is about that quality of relationships. And that quality of relationships is impossible to legislate. It's impossible to put into policy, but that's where leadership matters. And that's where organizational partners that are willing to meet you where you are, district partners that are willing to meet families and students where they are with a spirit of inquiry, that's really an indication of healthy and strong and sustainable process.
Yeah, I'm so interested in what you say about trust, which has not been in long supply in our country recently, and it makes me worried, but it also makes me really excited about Tony's leadership on this, because the honesty and the enthusiasm that he brings, there's not a lot of room for skepticism when you listen to Tony. You find your head going, bobbing up and down and thinking, yeah, this sounds great. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take some time, but yeah, let's go with this. I'm curious Jeannie, go ahead, please. You got to unmute yourself so we can all hear you.
In addition to saying amen to all that was just said, I want to say also an important leading indicator is teachers feeling happy, proud of their work, satisfied, feeling like they're finally getting a chance to do the kind of work that they hoped they could do when they became teachers in the first place. So even though this is tough and complicated and challenging, I think it is also a way to really sort of bring a great deal of satisfaction and to teachers' work.
As we get ready to go to questions, I'd actually like to pose a question to all of you. And Tony alluded to this, and I don't know if you all saw it, but there was a story actually specifically about the challenges of early school success and reading success in the New York Times earlier this week. And that article, the basic theory of the case in that article, in that Times article, was this is a human capital challenge. We actually know what to do. There just aren't enough people. We can't find enough people to do this work right now. And there's a way in which not only the community schools approach, but the other things that the superintendent mentioned, what they take is people who know what to do. And I think a lot of what we're hearing from school districts that we all talk to is, I got you on the big ideas, and we actually have money. We can't find people to hire. I'm curious how you all feel about that and what your reaction is. Abe, you want to start on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially now it's a real valid concern that we're hearing across the board in all different settings around the country. And in a weird way, I feel as if the community school strategy isn't like the quick fix for that, but it does help to mitigate some of it, right? When we talk about what a community school is, we have something called the developmental triangle, which includes these three really critical pieces. One is the core instructional program. Another piece is the services that remove barriers to learning, so supportive services. And we also have something that we describe as expanded learning opportunities. And the word expanded actually does a lot of work there. We're thinking about expanded time. We're thinking about expanded ways of engaging young people, but also expanding who is doing the work. That it's not just putting all of this responsibility on teachers, but looking at community partners, at volunteers, at families, at young people themselves, who in some cases work with their peers or near peers. So it really is kind of rethinking how we do this work, that it's not always going to come from the school district alone. Schools can do a lot. We know they cannot do it all. And the good news, they don't have to do it all. We can get more folks engaged in this work. And so again, it's not going to solve all of the challenges that we're seeing right now, but it will at least get, I think it's a really important invitation at the exact right time to get more people focused on this.
Hey, and I see you nodding. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that, yes, there is definitely a human capital challenge in terms of professionals who both understand and work according to this paradigm. But I think the other piece that we can't skip over, and this a little bit goes back to trust, is that trust has been actively broken. There are communities that do not trust public systems, that do not trust schools, that have no reason to give us the benefit of the doubt that we're going to do anything different with billions of dollars than we do right now. All of that is not just human capital, but it's also relational capital. So how is it that we are thinking about human capital, not just in terms of the professionals who are certificated or classified or who have different types of credentials, but really thinking through the community assets of who is a trusted messenger within that community, and how is it that we are leveraging those voices, that leadership, to be able to develop strategies that are inclusive, that are culturally affirming, that are linguistically sustaining, to be able to do that work well. So I do believe that, yes, we're seeing it just like a lot of other industries, and education is an industry, that there is a staffing shortage. But the shortage that we really see in education is not new, and that's about the relationships and really being able to identify and name where that harm has happened in the past. We can't expect people just to get over it if they're not going to have us actually model, see, and name the harm that has been done to them.
Araceli, I saw you nodding. I'm curious about your experience in Anaheim with just this set of questions, because I'm sure that a lot of this came up as you were trying to do your implementation.
Yeah, no, I love what Hayan was saying about, looking at the assets within our community. And although there is a shortage, I mean, being able to hire community school coordinators for our sites would be just such a big benefit, because they are the ones who are making these relationships, who are forming, partnerships with community-based organizations, who are bringing our own families onto campus to support the work we're doing, looking at, what our parents have to offer, how could they support the work with our students. We have parents who are, were teachers in native countries, who could help us with tutoring. So we're looking at that. Yeah, perhaps we can't hire, more people, but we have assets within our community. So looking at that and bringing that in and focusing on what we have and not, what we're lacking, but how can we leverage what we already have within our community? And we have a lot of assets. We have a great multicultural, community in Anaheim. And it's just, amazing that, we're able to do so much. But, the $3 billion is definitely going to help. It is about the money at times. And, so this is exciting. And, just being able to continue to support the work that's already happening.
Araceli, let me stick with you for just a second. Describe your ideal community schools coordinator so people can get a really concrete notion of who that individual might be, what training, and what that individual does.
Oh gosh.
I'm just going to add because the question came in, and then what kind of training specifically are they
Great.
getting?
Thanks, Emily.
So yeah, I think if we had more time, I would just pull our 2 community school coordinators who I know are on right now and really, have them speak to this, because we have 2 amazing folks in Anaheim, Araceli Huerta and Tanya Garcia, who are doing exceptional work. And I think it starts just by, you have to find the right person that has the passion to do this kind of work.
Mhm.
We talked about, bringing folks to the table and listening to what they need. So we really need people who can have that skill to be able to listen to our community and really meet the needs of where we're at. We need somebody who's empathetic, who's compassionate, who can, build positive relationships within our community, somebody who can navigate the community and look at, what assets are out there, what resources are out there, somebody who's creative and, is thinking out of the box and really working with, what we have, and somebody who is going to have those courageous conversations with the leadership at the sites, those conversations that sometimes we avoid, right? Because, for whatever reason, but we need somebody who's going to have that courage to speak up and really be the voice of the community. As far as training, so we sort of just kind of, we built the plane as we flew, that's how we did it in Anaheim. But I know that now there's so many organizations out there, including, the National Coalition for Community Schools and others that are offering trainings, that there's courses out there you can take. But I think, visiting other sites, was really helpful for us. So we went out and visited Hayward. We went to New York and visited their models, and really learned from, the good things that were happening. And we took bits and pieces from every place and really just, built our own structure. But yeah, there's a lot of resources out there. And I know maybe Abe can speak to that a little more.
Abe, I was going to ask you, I was also going to ask you, Abe, across the various projects that you all have worked on, a community school coordinator reports to whom? I know that's a kind of a concrete question, but I'm curious, like, where in the hierarchy of a school does a community schools coordinator live?
Yeah, what a great question. 'Cause I think we've seen different models here, and I think we actually have a recommendation about how to set this up. So actually, part of what I wanted to say, I'm glad you called me, because I wanted to point out that in addition to identifying, what makes a coordinator really effective and creating opportunities to learn, and incidentally, we're actually doing a boot camp for coordinators starting tomorrow. Too late for most folks, but we'll do it again this summer for folks who are interested. Right. Is also making sure that we are getting them set up for success. And one of the really important relationships in any community school is that of the coordinator and the principal. And we often talk about the coordinator almost being on the same side of the desk with the principal, kind of looking at the entire school, trying to understand how to be a strategic thinker, working shoulder to shoulder with the principal. That takes a certain kind of person to be that coordinator, and it takes a certain kind of person to be that principal.
Yeah,
to allow that kind of relationship to be there, which in some cases includes being a critical friend, and pushing back on ways in which the school is not always doing what it should, or how that leader needs to maybe think differently. And so the direct answer to your question is, we've seen many examples where the coordinator reports to the principal. And if that's the only reporting structure, we think actually that's not the right way to do it. It might make sense to also have someone at the district who can have a dotted line to that coordinator, so that when there are some differences, and actually we encourage the differences. We think that there is creative tension from having, we want that creative tension. It actually helps to have someone that the coordinator can work with to help navigate and mitigate some of the challenges. So if it's going to be a district-led model, that's what we recommend, where you have a nonprofit who is the supervisor or the organization where that coordinator works. It's a little bit easier to create that creative tension because we're talking about two organizations now. But even there, the coordinator in that scenario has their official supervisor at the organization, and they also have kind of a dotted line to that principal. So I think in both directions, it's important to create that kind of structure.
I hope we're putting lots of resources from Abe and others into the chat, and they'll be available to people even after this call. Emily, are there any questions that have come in that you want us to address?
Well, first of all, I need to thank our speakers, especially Hayan and Abe, for furiously answering the lots of questions that were coming in. And I think that you've really answered all of the discussion points, or all of the questions, but I just want to, so it's almost going to be like repeating some things that you've said earlier, because these questions were, I think, interesting. But so if you could go back to that question of what are the top 3 things, if there's a teacher in a school that knows about this funding availability, is super jazzed on community schools, it's not yet a community school, what are the top 3 specific things they can do to get it going?
Araceli, why don't you start?
Yeah.
I'd say, at a very, small level at a school, you start with your school site council. You have parents that sit on school site council, you have administrators, you have students, you have, teachers. So you bring that conversation to the table, and you get support from your school site council. And then that will trickle down, to other groups, right? And you just have to start having those conversations about what is a community school to start to get some momentum going. You don't have to start big. You don't have to start big. You go to these different spaces that provide opportunities to have these conversations and talk about these. There's so many committees on school that you could do this, but I would start with school site council.
Awesome.
Abe, you've seen this for years now, and I'm curious what your thoughts are for getting started.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually starting small makes a lot of sense. There are generally, you're going to find other people who maybe don't even have the words for it yet, but they know they want something to be different. If you can find a critical mass of people who can just start to dream a little bit together and identify other folks they might want to bring to this conversation, I think that makes that is a really good starting point. What's really great now is that there probably is an example community school not too far away. And so we also recommend, just go talk to your peers, go find a school that's doing this, see if you can just, ask those basic questions. Obviously, we want to be a resource to folks, but there are other people who do the work that we do that could be a resource. I know Hayan is also doing this for a lot of folks now across the state. There is an incredible opportunity for the folks in California in particular, but I think anyone in the country can access this. There is a conference coming up that the Coalition for Community Schools is doing in LA in early June. And so that would be a great place to get a group of folks who are just exploring this idea to learn more about what it entails, but also to understand, who is doing this work, what's the landscape like. And I think from there, you'll get some pretty good next steps.
I'd like to ask all of you as an extension of this. Part of what we're talking about is creating a forum for engagement for parents and for other community members in schools. That's been happening in a kind of an unsettling way in school boards recently and in elections recently. And Jeannie, I don't know if this is part of your caution about this, but creating a new forum in a world in which we're struggling with trust and engagement, respectful engagement, feels a little scary to me right now. I'm just curious what you all think about that. If it's the coalition of the everybody who agrees, generally, that's one thing. But creating another forum for divisive disagreement is not, I think, it doesn't sound so appealing right now. Hey, and I'm curious what you think about all that.
So in addition to this question and the last question, I think this is about, Araceli said it at the beginning, don't reinvent things, don't create new things. And I think that with this reality around all of the divisiveness, I think that it's important to look at what you're proud of and why you're proud of it and who is proud of it and who is not proud of it. I think starting this work with questions around where those relationships and where those divisions are is really, really important. And I think starting with something that you are proud of and understanding what are the expectations of having that, who are those expectations for, who is not part of that work, that is really important sort of grounding to be able to bring people around in those conversations. And that can also mitigate some of the divisiveness, right? If you are going to sort of take that strength, that relational, that trust strength, that basis and that foundation, and then say, well, what's the next thing that we want to try to do? Or who needs to be part of this conversation that isn't part of it yet? You don't do community schools onto folks. I don't marry onto my husband. Sometimes I do, but it yet generally doesn't work well, right?
Yeah.
And this is about coming to this with, Jane Quinn, who was at the National Center for Community Schools for many years, and my mentor talks about community schools is about having yes in your heart. And it's also having yes in your running shoes, because you are walking alongside, running alongside all of your partners and trying to figure out, how do I do these connections? And that isn't clean. It's not cute. It's not about, a task force alone, right? This is about the relationship work and about really being able to create those opportunities for deeper inquiry together, instead of just doing this separately to do onto, to fix kids, to fix problems.
Jeannie, I want to give you the last word.
Okay. Well, I think one of the great advantages that community schools has is that so far it's been a very bipartisan kind of effort, that it really brings together people who care about children and their well-being and don't see that as a politically charged issue. And I think the challenge now is to keep it that way. I mean, there are many elements of community schools that could be misconstrued as just more of this progressive liberal agenda, or misconstrued as catering to people of color in a time that'll make white people feel bad. That we just can't let that happen, because that's not what this is about. And we need to continue to say, no, this is a purple strategy, and we're gonna, and that's how we have to talk about it, and that's how we have to do it, because it's too important to let it get caught up in any kind of political divisiveness.
That is going to be the last word, because it's not going to get any better than that. I just want to thank all of you, starting with the Superintendent Thurmond and Araceli and Hayan. Jeannie, it's wonderful to see you. And Abe, thank you so much for participating in this conversation and for all that you've done for this movement over the years. And with that, I think I want to turn it back to Emily to close us out.
Thank you. And I'm going to say thank you too. I was so inspired by Superintendent Thurmond that, I used to live in California. I kind of wish I lived in California again too, just to have him as the leader of education in that state. It's so amazing. So thank you to him and his team. And thank you to all of you. We had such a powerhouse panel today, and the ideas have just been so important and enlightening, and all of the questions got answered. So thank you for that. And interestingly enough, our session next week is on moving towards relationship-centered schools. So that could have been the topic today, but next week we're going to be featuring David Shapiro from Mentor. And then, so if you want to, also I want to ask everybody, if you haven't yet, to complete the our quick little poll before you log off, because we really take your feedback very, very, very seriously. So please take a minute to just quickly do that poll. Let us know what you think, and then. Sierra, if you want to pull up the upcoming webinar slides, please do join us again next week for more conversation about relationship-centered schools, thinking about that sort of combination of what we're all talking about, what's getting funded right now, in addition to community schools, is tutoring and mentoring and those kinds of support. So what does that look like in a school? That will be next week. Coming up in future weeks, we also have looking at child savings accounts, children's savings accounts, and learning ovations as a key tool for data-based approach learning. So thank you again to everybody, and we are so excited. We are going to be revisiting community schools, revisiting what we call these big bet worthy approaches. And so please come back and join us again. So thanks to everybody. And
Thank you all.